So with what I see when I unfocus, I see a large landscape. And with that large landscape, what happens on the ground uh, is seen a little more clearly, and therefore that's what I'm going to present. This is about a hydel power project which was uh, being built on Bhagirathi River, which flows from in Uttarkashi district of Himalayas. And this was a hydel power project being established by one of the large public sector undertakings in thermal power. And this, to build this project, here is what you see. So upstream, there's this Lohari Nag village, and downstream, there's this Pala village. So there's an 18-kilometer tunnel they needed to bring water to the turbines. In order to bring straight water to the turbines, they had to build a tunnel about 1.5 meter wide, and they started blasting Himalayas for it. Blasting is a nice way of destroying ecology, environment, people, and all that. Now, before we come to the other aspect of this power project, I would like to just say as to what this project entailed. It was a 600 megawatt power station. What was promoted was that it would provide employment opportunities to local youth, 231 jobs. 600 megawatt power station, 3,000 crore rupees of investment, and 231 jobs for local people in 6 villages. And in the downstream village, only 25 people. Now, this project, in the greater wisdom of the Supreme Court of India, was shut down in 2010, was closed down after making nearly 800 crores of rupees of investment. And these are some of the reports that cover that this entire stretch from Uttarkashi to Gangotri is what is called Devbhumi. It's familiar to all of us, that this is where the Hindu religion flows along with the mother of Ganga, which is Bhagirathi. So, they made this entire stretch. Several dams were proposed to be planned on this entire Bhagirathi and downstream. This is also where one of the largest dams built. This Tehri Dam is also on the same. Tehri Dam has its own story, but I'm just going to talk about this project, what it delivered to people. So finally, the Supreme Court stopped this project. Now, what really happened to people who were living in the nearby areas? So where they were, they were in the upper reaches of Himalayas. They were surviving on some kind of agriculture of potato and their own cereals. So there was a shift in agriculture from those to cash crops. And the whole mindset of the population that was living there, that they started focusing on financial returns. And whatever the traditional practices they had to abandon all of those. Of course, it did give some kind of financial security to those 231 jobs that it created. But then, once the project was suspended, what happened? There was total dependence on savings, there was total feeling of insecurity, there was increased independence on agriculture, and this led to migration. The bottom. This also dried up all the traditional water bodies in the Himalayas, so the population could not be sustained. Those people who had been living there for over 200 years, they had to migrate. Now, one question one might ask, a well-meaning planner might ask, what business do these people have staying so high in the mountains? Well, you might as well ask, but not answer them. They've been doing that for 200 years, and you just simply don't want to shift them altogether from there. Now, I'm trying to look at things from what Professor Malcolm said, and only an academic can do that. And we look at the whole picture from a different angle and present questions and run away with it and not present the answers. I'm sorry, there are no easy answers. But how does it get implemented? This is taken from one of the public sector undertakings CSR activities, and the kind of picture that they present to their bosses. There is something called an MOU, which Department of Public Enterprises enters with every public sector undertaking. They are given these weights. There are units, as you can see. Everybody is overshooting those targets, so everything is achieved. And yet, what we see is that this entire destruction on the ground in the wake. Now, this was for a public sector undertaking. As you can see, all the targets are being achieved by a huge number. Everybody is getting a weightage, and government has a feel-good factor that, look, everything is fine, hunky-dory. We have integrated CSR into the entire policy framework. And that is assigned what is called a balanced scorecard measure to each of these CSR activities. Now, I question myself, and I say, look, I'm short of breath because somebody has stolen my clean air. My entire body system is sick because I don't have water to drink. And the doctors are looking at the small wounds on my body, and they are putting Band-Aids out there on my body. Am I a fool to go to the wrong doctor? Is the doctor a fool who's giving the wrong kind of treatment to me? Now, this is a huge question. I think I'm really thankful to Professor Malcolm for laying this groundwork on which I'm trying to build something. Now, here is the budget utilization for this thing. Now, this is how it gets done in the private sector. This is again from a power company, power utility company in a private sector, and these are the things that they are focusing on, and this is how they are reporting their CSR activities. Again, it goes back to the same doctor. Is my doctor treating me right? Who's the doctor here? Is the government the doctor, or is the business the doctor? Am I going to the guy who's killing me, who's primarily responsible for taking my breath, who's taking my fresh air? Am I going to the same doctor to treat me? And this is the way they've been treating me. They've been putting Band-Aids on my body all over the place. No wonder nothing is happening. And now I come to what is the solution to it. Now, here is what the government has given this framework. So this is the section 135. The government has brought out this change in the Companies Act, and I specifically focus on part C here, which says the CSR projects programs of a company may also focus on integrating business models with social and environmental priorities and processes in order to create shared value. Now, that's huge coming from government, if government understands what is shared value. There's a framework Michael Porter advanced in 2006, and wise people in the corporate sector laughed at him. Does he understand what is he talking about? Then he expanded this in a 2011 article, what he means by shared value and how the companies are benefiting by integrating this. So one look at it, and I would say that this particular provision in the Companies Act does provide a window of opportunity for the companies to do the thing while they are focusing on their economic advantage. So this is one way to integrate societal and environmental values with their economic advantage and not outsource it in small measures to put Band-Aids at different points. So this is the value chain activities. In fact, how what he suggests is, again, in part 8, as you see, that the social business projects are also involved. There's the schedule given in the same section. Now, what is a shared value and what, so what is the way he looked at it. So rather than saying that what is this framework, thinking about, business as the giver, society as the taker, he says not that. Uh, Businesses do exist as part of society, and therefore, the way to create shared value, he has clearly defined there are three ways that you need to rethink products, services, and markets. Now, let's take an example here. Rubina just outlined the GRI reporting guidelines and all that. One of the companies I know has been reporting and meeting those standards for the last 9 years. This is a tobacco company in India. And they surpass all the benchmarks Rubina just outlined. They kill me first, and they tell us that, look, we are meeting all the reporting guidelines. India is a jugaad country. You got lots of professionals here who tell you, who will give you compliance reports next day if you just give them the time. So, worst company in the world, and they'll next day come out with a set of reports fabulously and printed and all that, and say they are meeting all the guidelines. This jugaad professionalism of any kind of guidelines. So there is an ISO 9000, there is a GRI 12,000 or whatever, and there's a sustainability. You come with the standards, we'll comply, of course, because we have these jugaad professionals who will produce any kind of compliance report, right? So we need to think that if you are a cigarette company or if you are a cola drink company, which is their largest cola drink company, they are talking about, oh, we are meeting. I heard on BBC that they say we are meeting all the, we are water neutral, whatever water that we are drawing from groundwater, and whatever we are discharging into the ground as our pollution, we are meeting all the guidelines, fine. But about 20% of this youth between 9 and 13, they are obese because they use this carbonated and sugared drinks. Yeah. These sugared drinks. They are not looking at that. So it's not the cigarette company alone, it's the, you got to look at the product that you are selling. And if that product is causing harm, that you are not probably meeting all the, I don't know about these reporting guidelines, I'm sorry. But we try to look at these things as well. Why shouldn't we? Then we took at productivity in the value chain, and I would say that productivity in the value chain is, of course, if you cannot integrate these environment and societal concerns, then we are not producing economic value, we are creating economic problems. The people who are obese now in this young age are forever going to impose trillions of dollars of future healthcare costs on the governments, on the societies. That's not economic value you are creating. So one has to look at creating this total economic value, which is not dissociated by an economic framework called externalities. These are not externalities. These are internalities which must be integrated on the company's balance sheets. And then, of course, this is to provide some support to what is being currently done, and that is providing supportive industry clusters. So these are the thoughts that somebody else, Michael Porter of Harvard Business School, has advanced, which I share, which I feel that are more in tune with what is required from the corporations, and the corporation can advance both the societal agenda in turn along with their own economic agenda. So that's it. Thank you.
This power project has destroyed the river system in this Uttarakhand, as well as it is also happening in the state of Sikkim. My question is, if I ask to the corporate guys, corporate top levels, who has given you the power to destroy my world, because of it is, I am not the owner of this world, you are not the owner of this world, nobody is the owner of the world. only we have taken that world lease for 80, 90, whatever years I will survive. Who has, if my next generation ask me this question, who has given you power to destroy this environment? What will be my answer? Number one. Number two question I wanted to ask.
Be short,
Ms.
no?
Sen.
Be short, please.
I wanted to ask Ms. Sen, you are talking of the sustainable development. Is there any formula or have we formulate any formula which can give you the parameter of sustainable development, right? It is happening in the area of the profit organization, like your retention, like your leverage, like your your return on your sell, like there is a formula. Have you frame out any formula to judge the sustainability growth of the environment? That is my two questions.
Question for whom? All the house
First
or-
question is from for Dr. Agrawal, and second question is from.
Okay.
I'll take the first question because that is safer. I'm happy to share that I'm not part of the corporate and I can answer this question easily. One of the, the understanding in the corporate sector about what is CSR and of course your question was that who has given the power. That is, of course, the government gives them this power to do all these sorts of things. But look at their own understanding. One of the largest infrastructure companies in India is again blasting a 10-kilometer tunnel in order to reduce the 50-kilometer distance between Srinagar and Leh. That's where they're building this tunnel, and shockingly, this is being done under as a CSR activity. Yes, it is. It's a corporate social responsibility that it will benefit people, and yet destroying Himalayas. Again, the method adopted is blasting. Blasting is uncontrolled. Blasting destroys much more things than what it creates, a tunnel or whatever. And if you don't understand something, would you necessarily build something out of it by destroying it? And this is being done as a CSR activity. Who has allowed them? Of course, it's the government. And how the government works, I think this government, our government, is not different from the governments everywhere else, where the governments and the business get together and say that this is what is required for your economic activity, and things must go on, and so on and so forth. If you recall the case of Kudremukh Iron and Ore Steel Company, this was a mining company. Somebody discovered that this was an iron-rich area in 1805. For 150 years, nothing got done. In 1976, 75, when emergency was declared in India, that is the time within a space of 1.5 years, this Kudremukh Iron and Ore Steel Company was established. A township was built, all project clearances were given, and this was given to public sector. Now, again in 2004, as a Supreme Court intervened and stopped this activity, there was a lot of arguments to allow this company to go on. Say because 12,500 people depended on it, their livelihoods depended on it, and the government and the business both argued the case for it, that this should be allowed to go on. But it was finally Supreme Court which took the final view and said, no, this must be stopped and it's closed now. So I hope you have part of the answers as to what goes on when something, some activity is promoted. There is a lack of awareness, lack of understanding, even on the part of people who are doing it, and to what purpose they are doing it. Then it requires its own momentum in order to get things done the same way they have been done. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So the formula for me is actually for sustainable development is reporting. That I'm not saying because I come from Global Reporting Initiative, but whether you follow any of the frameworks, I think unless you measure, manage and change the risks and opportunities within your organization, you won't be able to get into development. So it's not about taking up a project and just doing and then leaving that project in 2-3 years. It should, to make it an ongoing process. I think reporting need to be introduced at every stage. And it is materiality which is the key to this GRI guidelines, which should be focused on. Please focus your report and also engage your stakeholders. And just to also add on to what Professor Agarwal mentioned, that companies are just complying on various standards and frameworks, and yet there is no result. The thing is, there is a difference between disclosure and reporting. So disclosure is just a tick box exercise whereby you say, yeah, we comply to all these things. And reporting is the whole process whereby you measure, manage, and bring about change and identify your risks. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, second question.
My question is to Girish sir. Girish sir, my name is Nadisha Dondi. I have two questions. I go ahead with what the lady said, that report. Are you aware, and you must be aware, that there is a very serious talk at all levels, at Mullah level, at Gram Panchayat level, at every level, to prevent droughts and flooding. There is going to be linking of rivers. That is going to completely annihilate not only the environment, but is going to change weather patterns. Everybody knows about it. What are we doing? We have raised our voice several times, and we have been put in the dustbin of history. That's question one. How do we go ahead? I'm not saying that we are not reporting. How do we go ahead when we meet with this resistance? The second question again to you, Girish sir, is what is the status, I would like to know, about that 800 crore which Supreme Court stopped in Himalayas? I mean, is it just abandoned, or are they restructuring something, or are they going to utilize something? Because 800 crores public money from the national exchequer is a big time deal. So what is the status? Okay, even on that. So these two questions.
That 800 crore is spent on a good cause. Because it has now been stopped, let's forget about this bad money. In Karnataka, in this Kudremukh, there was 3,000 crore rupees invested, and that's again stopped because of the Supreme Court intervention. We would say that once you are into the, you got a hand into the public exchequer, then any time you stop flow of bad money, it's a good time to stop. And I think what they did was that stop the flow of bad money. So let's just forget about that. This was limited only to 800 crores and 3,000 crores, and not hundreds of thousands of crores that, you know, take a case, take this, particularly the flood which happened recently in Uttarakhand. This has been attributed to these kind of blasting activity in Himalayas. There is no strong case that has been built up that this was exactly the cause and that's the effect. But many of these dams and this built up, there is a kind of a hypothesis that is being floated, and that this was the cause. Do you think that cost is not greater, though so many human lives lost in this? So that's part two of your question. The part one is that could we have had these kind of things if we had the right kind of decision-making structure? What should have been the governance structure for this, these Mohalla Sabhas or the participatory democracy that you're talking about? We would say the chances would be a lot less that these kind of projects would get sanctioned. Because these projects do get sanctioned behind closed doors, and lot of information is hidden away from the public domain. Even when we have RTI, this information is not made public. For Ganga Basin, I came across some of the various documents related to this kind of project, and all have been shut down, blocked. This right to information is no use even to unlock those documents where the bureaucracy might have hidden with their intentions, and the business would have allied with them. So having participatory democracy, great. Having it deepened, great. Hopefully this will put a stop to this nonsense.